had 11 people to begin with. We added one, which made 12. We're unique, apparently, since they tell me the others are all at 10 and 11. And got the 8th, in other words, the way we started out, if you remember, because Ms. Bunce was alone and presenting 9 to 5, you know, it was the first one right after the series, and nobody wanted to get way up front to start right off with research. We weren't able to get 2 to move to begin with, so that you'll see what the problem, it presents a small problem, how we're going to handle it, and see if we're all in agreement of how to modify it to manage it. So we got Scharling and Price as 2 more presenters today on occupational health. We got Zollikofer and McKenzie on, well, that's today, right? Any disagreement? We agreed to this. We agreed to cancel November 15, right? Everybody together on that? And see if this is your understanding. Retirement is Zollikofer and McKenzie. And I would suggest, since these 2 people got together to decide the order of presentation and whether there was any that type of thing, you know, whether one's more, I think you'll hear about that. Even if they're unrelated, they've at least described an order of presentation. And retirement is Zollikofer and McKenzie. Still got a 12th person, Cookson, coming up. At that time, we agreed to go 2 to 6, right, to get rid of the 15th of November session. So we have to handle retirement. When they're done at 4, you get an evaluation of the, I guess you do it in all your courses, but I distribute something that you fill out that you then, it's whatever you call anonymous and all that, and that goes in an envelope and I return to them. There'll be overall discussion of the course, and then, if this was your understanding too, the only thing I've added to it is that, and I don't know whether she cares to comment on it, the nature of Cookson's presentation is lends itself to going on during this. It's not on one of the subject matters we have, so that it happens to lend itself to it as I saw the things. So I did make that modification. I gather the least way to describe it is musical in nature and therefore able to be presented during this kind of thing. Is that all right with everybody? Anybody have problems with this? Okay. There'll be food and drink, so what's that social can go on according to what you want to do with it.
Do we need to bring something?
I would, no, most of them are coming in very rapidly in here. I would hope, I'm going to be unavailable. In other words, I'll have to discuss with anybody who's going to not hand one in to me on the 8th, how you're going to hand them in to me, okay? Because I'm very tied up on the 9th and 10th and then leaving town. I won't be back till December 9th, so that I told you I was roaming when this course occurred, and I'm very pinned down in the sense that the only times I've gotten away is between Mondays, and I didn't get very far. This is how to find where I live. Shout anybody if you haven't got it. Coming out, I live roughly, about 4 miles from downtown Carver on Smith Level Road. So all I'm describing is, if you don't know that area, anybody shout. An easy way is there's a light at, Franklin Street becomes Main Street of Carver. Up Smith Level Road is Greensboro Street. Inside of Carver, it goes by Car Mills. If you come straight down Greensboro Street, there's a light. And another way to do it is come out Cameron and Merritt Mill and come into that light, okay? Which you all may know, or you come off of the bypass if you come from Now, there doesn't have to be driving. We'll talk about that in a minute. We can talk about so people that don't need cars. There's a 7-Eleven store on Smith Level Road over here. at the bypass. I'm 2.5 miles south if you have a speedometer, you need one. And at that point you hit an area called Heritage Hills past Dogwood Acres. And I'm on this southwest corner of the main corner, Yorktown Drive, that leads into a development there. And there is a U driveway that'll identify it with magnolia trees, the crepe myrtles are gone, that kind of thing.
So
Probably the
drive-
only person with a fenced-in 4x4 big former garden area now weeded over in their part of their front yard.
So the driveway's on Yorktown Drive?
Yeah, it's on, no, it's my driveway. This is
But
the
it's on
corner
York-
property. This is
but
the
it's on
corner
Yorktown
property.
Drive.
I'm called 1600 Smith Level Road, and it really means nothing. It once faced, you know, it's now faces Yorktown Drive. You know, you come in that way, okay? There once was a time, many years ago, the property was entered from that corner property from here. If you have a reason to come out 15501, then a quarter of a mile beyond me is 5 Points with the only suburban massage parlor and all other attributes like that, you know, so forth.
You're talking about that one.
South, yeah. You okay? South of Carver, on the road to Pittsburgh. This is the sort of shortcut, you know, a lot of people take to go to Pittsburgh, and because it comes into 15501.
going through the flash part of it.
Now,
Right, Bill.
what about the way they do it? Have you got that van? You don't have, what is the way, so people, what's the situation for cars at 2 p.m.? Let me see, because we can very easily see what we can do to put together cars. Anybody, start out, does anybody have a vehicle? And do those that don't have a vehicle have a means of linking with them, or I'll be very happy we'll start providing transportation. Who needs transportation that doesn't see one of the hands raised? Okay?
I can walk.
Now, where are you near any of these people at that point? Or do you want me to, I can,
We'll make sure she gets that.
or is anyone else? Because I can come in and be somewhere at, 1:45 or, just let me know. Everybody got transportation? Does this program suit you? I know, I can't remember who it was. Was it Mike Smith that had to get back to a job last time? Somebody had to get back to a 6 o'clock job. Does that exist at this time, Peter?
No, yeah, this is...
Okay. So is it all right?
I've got a meeting next Monday at like 5:30 that I'll have to contact.
Okay. Then you will have a vehicle, and whoever you bring will have other there'll be transportation out there. And is this all right? Is this the understanding? So we don't...
So we meet out there at 2.
2 o'clock, yeah. Are you able to roll the vehicles to be out there at 2, and the people on retirement will start presenting at 2, and then if it, depending on the weather, you can decide what you want to do out there, like build a fire, or, if you want to do that, your fireplace, if you want. If it's nice, it can be outdoors, or it can be in. I don't know what it'll be like in the week. If it's this bad outdoors, obviously nicer.
Would you like us to bring some food or something?
No, it'll be there. Food and drink and things like that will be there. If nobody brings moral majority with them, so. The order of these readings I'm passing out, some of these are clipped together only because I can't get the machine always to work. I have to do it all myself, so feeding it in and getting it to work out to staple them sometimes. So I'm handing them out. Very quickly, this one is on one side, women without pensions. On the other side, the military pension situation is extremely ample in our country. You want to pass these until they meet.
What's the exam going to be like?
The exam is going to be, I will furnish an essay question for the epidemiology course in the spring, one of 3 questions in spring. I wouldn't have the faintest idea what goes on in epidemiology, so what the other 2 will be, you all will.
Oh, so it'll be on.
Yeah, as I understand it, this becomes, don't you all move at this hour or something into epidemiology?
Yeah.
Is that not correct? And they told me to furnish 1 question, 1/3 of the exam grade. Now, I went over the first time, and I can only remember it vaguely, how I evaluate you beyond the exam, you follow me, which is on the nature of your participation in class discussion for, I forget, for something, whatever that was, 15 or 20% for your research paper and handling a verbal, presentation of it was a major proportion, and the exam was the exam grade. I mean, I guess that exam question given you as part of epidemiology, obviously I grade, so that'll be the evaluation. This next is a short article from that retirement organization I'm passing around, and you get some idea of the class problems, what people have to be busy in retirement. Remember, I'm not again dealing with what the 2 peak presenters will deal with next week. This last one is the Kiplinger letter, a very big business letter, which sort of means from their point of view they're setting at rest some of the nonsense discussions that Social Security is bankrupt and finished. And you see, when they talk to each other, they don't talk like they talk in political circles, and it's all going to be walloped into line, and they're brought around. Then on the back, while they're going to wallop it into line to make it viable, you all are going to become the people who benefit, as the Wall Street Journal points out, from the tax breaks for professionals. That's what they're alarmed about, Can a doctor set aside $50,000 a year for his, retirement? And why can't he? And why is he discriminated against? See, you'll see that. There's an ironic implication, This is a 2-sided one again, a little bit about working people that are being mobilized in retirement by their unions, something the unions were lazy about, didn't do anything about. They've now affected legislation in Arizona and so forth. Like they simply brought out the retired steel workers in Arizona. There were so many of them from the Middle West, they simply abolished the sales tax on food by just, you take 4,000 experienced old-timers, they hit that legislature like a storm, and it was a right-wing legislation, immediately abolished the sales tax on food. It gives you some idea of the potential. The other part of it is high anxiety about pensions, Wall Street Journal. When Braniff Aircraft bankrupts, when Johns Manville bankrupts, you don't want to just think of it as a small matter. They can lose their pensions, you follow me? People that have counted on it, that are a month away from pension. The last one is Texaco messing with people's pensions and getting a long strike in Texas, of all places, by messing with people's pensions over high interest rates, and a letter to the editor of the New York Times pointing out the importance of having a chance of working after 65.
Who pays your Xeroxing costs, Mike?
Huh?
Who pays your Xeroxing costs?
I do, but I also moonlight off of people and, free idle. I got here and I forgot I have a lost weekend, so I didn't know to turn my clock back, so I got over here. Didn't finish a couple of the readings and use their Xerox. No, but I lecture over here for them, when they ask me to, that kind of thing. I'm not on anybody's payroll, so if they give me very much static, I say, I haven't paying me anymore, so that, at least you can do is leave me alone when I'm on your Xerox machine.
Did I get the Xerox number on? Which one?
Oops.
But you didn't mean for me to pay for your Xerox, isn't it?
The Osha?
All right.
Well, I had 85 cents in my pocket at the time.
And you're out of money?
No, I'm fine.
The real price is broken.
Did you get one?
Okay. I'm sorry if I cut into your time a little bit.
No, that's fine.
That was to arrange.
No, I got
Mr. Scharling, it's yours to start with.
Bill and I are both talking about occupational health today in one way or another. It's interesting because we didn't plan on meshing when we talked about it, but he's gotten an article here about someone who works for URW, the United Rubber Workers, which is interesting because my presentation's on the tire industry. It's a project that I chose because there was a fellow up in Durham that works for NCOSH, the North Carolina Occupational Health Project, that has been involved with some tire plants in Batesville and Wilson, North Carolina. So I did some research into the plants and the health hazards that go along with it. And I was real fortunate in that I got a film from him that has a short segment on the health hazards in the tire industry. I didn't know that when I first went to talk with him, and it's nice, and I'll play that in just a minute. I'm going to be talking about the history of rubber production, the tire production process, which is what all this mess is here. It's fairly complicated, but I can't tell you about the health hazards until you know a little bit about the terminology, and I won't go through it all because it is fairly intricate. It's a real interesting process. We all take tires for granted, like a lot of things, but it's a neat process. There's a lot of hazards that go along with it, and I'll be talking about the health hazards. There's positive measures that the industry has done to deal with it, and that's going to be interesting because Bill's paper gets on OSHA a little bit. The plant that I went to is trying to deal with them, but they're just starting in what they're trying to do. And I'm going to talk about the status of the Firestone plant in Wilson, North Carolina. I went down there with Mr. Austin a couple of weeks ago to talk to some union members that are having problems in the health and safety committee that they're working on, and they're trying to find out what they can do about hazards at their plant. The film's good. It talks about, it's a fellow in an industrialized city that's at a tire plant. He's come down with kidney cancer. He feels that his father and his mother have also come down with kidney cancer because of the plant, and it shows a short segment about what the workers are trying to do about it.
This is one of the films that the Reagan administration.
And Bill, I meant to say one other thing. I know about the tire industry. Bill probably knows a heck of a lot more about the governmental agencies that they have to deal with and all that sorts of deals. So you can ask me questions at first, cut in anything you want to ask about, anything that I'm saying. If you have questions about the government and laws and things like that, Bill's going to follow my report, and then we'll both take questions either way. What were you going to say?
You may recall that the Reagan administration banned certain films that were made under the Carter OSHA administration. This is one of them. Yeah.
Okay. This is the start of the film. Since I haven't started it there, I just want to play the That's the projector. The segment that they ran right after that was a train industry in New York City that was having a particular problem.
always had the feedback in the back. We did.
If you can't work it through with management on a health and safety problem, there are other things you can do. In a small eastern town, home of a tire processing plant, several avenues are being pursued, with OSHA, with NIOSH, which tests health hazards, and finally with a lawsuit against the parent company filed by workers on their own and led by Paul Heinrich.
Well, I was born in Cumberland, 30th of January, 37. My dad, we was all born and raised in Cumberland. Dad worked over there for, I guess about 22, 23 years. And I've been over there, been going on 22 now. Be 22 in August. I guess within a 4-year period, my mother come down with cancer. My dad, they give him 5 years, and then I come up with it 6 months after him. And the literature you read now that we get in here, cancer definitely can be carried on to your family. I feel in my mind there's something in there.
Want to go to the car? Come on.
We were married 24 years. I got 3 boys. I got a grandson, 9 months. Oh yeah, my boys think they're pretty tough shooting pool. We shoot pool together. If I can get them on the plan, I like to see them go there. It's good money. I don't want to expose what I've been exposed to. If I can accomplish what I'm trying to do, I have no feeling. Like I said before, that paycheck's good, but you want to live to enjoy it. I've been on the safety committee since 1967. In the early days, all you thought about was safety problems. And then the last couple of years, I guess we just become aware that there are people that has cancer over there. And then we started piecing together.
What we have to impress on the people is that we're not trying to shut the plant down. We just want a healthy place to work. It may not hurt us now, but what
I
happens
first made up my mind to do this when I had my kidney taken out, cancer.
then all of a sudden we come down with some disease? Is it related to the work, to the chemical we were working with? We don't know. That's what we're going to find out.
Knowing that we have the state and federal organizations we can go to and have backing for it.
You never had a club to go with. And now you got the club. And, we're going to use it. I called the state in. At that time, we operated under the state Osha plan. You can fill out a complaint form, tell them the areas you want them checked, and keep your name off of it, and they're not allowed under the law to tell the companies who filed a complaint form. After being in for a couple months, they come up with nothing. They didn't have the equipment to do this testing. It's new equipment. So that's when we call them Osha.
What I want to participate in that conference. What's this thing gonna do?
All the testing that Osh did. They put these air sample things on the table, and they kept them on the people for an 8-hour period.
You can't turn the pump off unless you check with one of the industrial hygienists who will be in the area.
Okay, this is the part you're looking forward to.
Yeah, they took blood tests.
Guaranteed to be semi-painless.
They took urine tests.
Now I'm going to ask you some questions about past illness. Have you ever had hay fever?
No. Everybody we asked to participate did.
Asthma? No.
Everybody, I think everybody realized we had a problem. They wanted to find out.
No.
And, hey, I'm proud of them.
No.
When they were testing the Tarnax, they found a nitrosamines coming out of that, the mixture, I guess, in the rubber. And nitrosamines are a family of chemicals, and the biggest percentage of them chemicals are cancer. So they said the amount that they found in the plant was 10 times higher than any plant that they ever tested. The federal government said, hey, we've got the problem, this exhaust system we want to install in their building. So after their 4th study, the last report I just got here a couple weeks ago, the exhaust systems that they put in has taken this out almost 100%. We're
and see what they've done on the asbestos and the lead poisoning and so forth since they've gotten going on it, and they've found that it has very probable cause. They don't let it die because the companies or people involved say, let's let it die. They keep working at it. And it's just good to know that at least one of the government agencies we're paying for is out there for our good.
We're happy it's cleared up. This is something we wanted. But now we're interested in, the people that's been exposed. Osh is not coming in to do any more testing. But they want to do an epidemiological study of the whole plant. And I guess the reason for that is because even though they've got rid of most of it, people that's been exposed since the 50s, they're probably going to get some cancer. It's too late for them. They're going to get it. Myself, along with about 18, 19 others, we feel we got this from the plant. There was only 5 or 6 of us still alive, and the rest of them were the people that still worked there. And it's something we got coming to us, I feel. If I got cancer from that plant, they owe me. Not just for me, for everybody else. Somewhere down the line, I hope we can stop this, because I would say it's killing innocent people. Plants, not only rubber plants, are using chemicals that's causing cancer, and they're going to have to do something about it. And maybe this is going to be the route. Maybe somewhere down the line that people won't have to worry about this. It's too late for me and a lot of other people. It's something we're going to have to worry about. I want to bring everybody up to date. I am filing suit about the cancer that I had last year. I'm doing this on my own. This union's not responsible. I mean, I know you guys have supported everything we've done through the safety committee. Without that support, we probably wouldn't be where we're at. And I know as soon as the company gets a hold of this, they're going to be a whole lot of fire. Do you want to make any comments on it?
If Paul can prove that his problems were work-related, why, I think that'll be a big breakthrough for the whole rubber industry.
If I had to give advice for anybody doing the same thing that I've been doing, use Osha. Osh to use. It's there for you to use. That's the idea. It's the only protection the working man has. If you don't use it, it's your fault. And every union in this country ought to be explaining to their people about these agencies. Non-union places, I can understand why some of them people get scared. But you still got the same rights. It's hard. But we are accomplishing things. The Osh studies have taken the nitrosamines almost clean out of the plant. And I mean, there's other things in there, I guess, but at least we know this is clearing up. So it's nothing you're going to do overnight. When you get into something like it, you prefer to spend a lot of time on it. And next comes a lawsuit. Everybody's kidding or something. I mean, when something like that is it's going to be a hard thing to do. But maybe if we don't win it, maybe the company's going to wake up and start watching what they put on the market. It's going to be worth it no matter what happens. According to
Acting Board. I'm going to talk about the history of rubber production now. One thing that I had to do, because I couldn't figure out how to tell you about these things, is I went ahead and tried to make slides from books and things like that. And it's the first time I'd ever tried it. I'd been wanting to do it a long time. And some of them came out okay, and some of them came out kind of bad. So bear with them. History, the production of rubber actually started back in the 18th century when European settlers traveled down to Central and South America and found the natives there that were using the milk from trees to be used for, they made boots out of them, they made rubber balls out of them for games and things like that. they took it back to Europe, as they did with a lot of things, and then started messing around with them chemically. This is a picture of a spiraling process. It's actually used on a rubber plantation in the Far East, but the idea is the same, of taking the milk, which is called latex, out of the rubber trees and doing various things with them. Now, they ran into problems with the first rubber that they had. The stuff from the trees was soluble in benzene. They could take it and put it in the benzene, put it between two layers of cloth, and they made a nice fabric from it. But it got real sticky and hot in the summertime and melted, and it got real hard and cold in the wintertime, and it cracked. So it wasn't very good. In the year of 1839, a fellow named Goodyear, who they say is a hardware salesman from Connecticut, came up with the process of vulcanization, which really spearheaded the whole industry. I don't know too much about organic chemistry from the years I took it. What he did was he put sulfur in with the rubber from the trees and heated it, which is why it's called vulcanization, from the Roman god of fire. It became resistant to heat in the summertime, it became resistant to cold in the wintertime, so it was much more pliable. He was able to use it for a lot of things that he couldn't before. They made raincoats out of it, they made tires for bicycles out of it. The car hadn't come along yet, so that wasn't a use. They used it for carriages. The first tires were solid tires as opposed to ones with air in them. Chemists, besides him, got into the act, and they found that isoprene was the main chemical derivative. They made polymers out of it, and from there things went along pretty well. There were two processes that were going on. There was the process of trying to make synthetic rubber, and there was the process of taking the rubber from the plantations and going from there. You end up with two different things. This was an example of a plantation plant in the upper Amazon where they're smoking the rubber latex. And here's an example of the Firestone plantation that's in Africa. The plantations were in South America, Central America, and then they moved to Ceylon in Malaysia, which proved to be an interesting problem that I'll tell you about in just a little bit. There was a difference between natural rubber tires and synthetic rubber. As this diagram shows, they were good for different parts of the tire, and they still are. The synthetic rubbers are no longer called just rubbers. They have the fancy name of vulcanizable elastomers, and they go all the way from the natural rubber, the wild rubber up there, and all these interesting kinds. Now, I don't know too much about any one of those, but the point is that they could synthesize it, and it did change the industry. When cars came along, that was the greatest boon for it. The price of the product went down, and the amount of production went up a whole lot. In World War II, the biggest change in the United States came because one of Japan's plans during the war was to cut off Malaysia and Ceylon, which they did, and they thought that would paralyze our country. In 1940, we had a production of only 2,560 tons of synthetic rubber in the United States. They cut off our plantations. We had to go to synthetic rubber, and within 4 years, by 1944, we were making 700,000 tons of rubber to use in the war. Now, the industry has a lot of complicated machines that go along with it, and I'll tell you about the processes as quickly as I can. The basic thing that the industry is trying to do is to make rubber products, and there's three things they do. They mix the rubber, they form it into the molds that they want to, and then they have to cure it. These processes right here, compounding, Bainbury mixing, milling, all these are the mixing process. The tire building is the forming process where they actually put it into molds. On the film, if you look really quick, you can see various examples of these machines. The curing process is the last part. I won't necessarily go through those. If you want to read them, that's fine. They take the crude rubber, which is that Play-Doh looking like stuff that you saw in the film, and they mix it with different compounds. And the compounds are rubbers and oils, or powders and oils, that a guy called a compounder comes up with to make a particular product. There's tons of different types of rubber products that we deal with every day, and they don't all have the same composition. So the compounder figures out his recipe. It's mixed in a Bainberry mixer. And that top picture right there is a Bainberry mixer, just a huge machine that mixes the compounds plus the materials and oils. They put in accelerators, which are chemicals that speed the process. They put in antioxidants, which are chemicals that keep the material from being oxidized, which keeps it from deteriorating as quick. They put in a material called carbon black, which is a pigment, which gives it its black color, but it's not for that purpose. It's to make other processes go better. That's what the mixer does. On the second part there, you can see a calender. Now, a calender is a machine that has several rolls in it. The material comes out of the mixer, it goes through 2 rolls, and it's folded out into long sheets that are eventually cut into sheets that go into the tire building. These processes here all involve calendaring. They roll them out into sheets. If you want to add steel to the belt to make it stronger, you go through the bead building process. If you want to make treads out of it, you go through the tread extruding process. And if you want to make tubes, as opposed to tires without tubes in them, you get tires with tubes in them too, just the thin tubes. That goes through the tube extruding process. All of these go to ply stock preparation. A ply is a sheet of rubber that is real long, looks like a big, huge, long ribbon that has cords in it to make it stronger. It might have the steel in it to make it stronger. It is still what's called a green tire. There's a property of rubber that's really kind of interesting, and it's called being tacky. And it doesn't mean it's lousy or whatever. It means that you can take these 2 different pots and mix the contents together, and when you end up with it, it'll be just like one unit. You won't be able to tell that this part came from this one and this one came from another. It's kind of like dough. You can take dough sometimes from 2 different places and put it together, and it ends up being one unit. Rubber will do that. There's a lot of chemicals and things that won't do that. While a tire is green, it'll mix and you won't have that problem. As soon as you cure the tire, it's now no longer tacky or non-tacky, as they say. The process of vulcanization is the process happening in the curing area, and it changes the processing properties of the rubber to properties that are use properties to the finished product. Before you vulcanize rubber, it's weak, it's plastic, it's soluble in benzene, and it's tacky. And you vulcanize it with sulfur and heat, and it becomes strong, elastic, insoluble, and non-tacky. And it's ready, it's its finished product right then. That's part of the problem, that they have a hard time reclaiming rubber and making things back from it again, because it is changed chemically a tremendous amount.
So do these companies in America still have rubber factories that put out so much, and then they use so much of the pure rubber with the synthetic to make things?
They do both. They have plantations and they get rubber from those places, and they also have synthetic rubbers. I don't know the percentages, and I wish I did. And again, it depends a whole lot on the product.
Is anything that's rubber an isoprene, whatever that is, derivative?
I assume it's an isoprene derivative, yeah, initially. Because that's what wild rubber is isoprene derivatives. It's C5H8 and then all these chains along with it. And what vulcanizing does is, again, organic chemistry is way above my head now, but it takes the chains of hydrocarbons and it cross-links the chains, so you no longer can make them. They're no longer plastic and they're no longer weak and they're no longer soluble. I don't know, Bill. That's a picture that's obviously from a book with my finger down at the bottom trying to hold the book apart, called the Rubber Red Book, and it's a catalog of nearly everything you want to know about the rubber industry as far as commercial products go. And here's a picture of 3 processes that we just talked about that are going on in a plant. Here is a calendar down here with the sheets of rubber coming through after it had been molded and pressed together. Here is some additional rubber and probably some cloth going on to the material that's coming out of the calendar. And these are green tires that are ready to be put into a mold. They're tremendously wide and they're cylinders, and what happens is they take that cylinder and they put it down on a mold on top of what they call a bladder. They put the mold down, the bladder opens up, and it forms, it does one of these deals here where it forms the 3 sides of the tire that we're used to. The material still can be molded there, it's still green, and it's being pushed along to this process right here. These are the molds. That's a green tire on the right that's getting ready to come along, and these are molded tires that have been put on top of the bladders and have been pressed out. Now there's, one of the big problems is ventilation in these plants, and you notice there's, evidently from right there, there's no way to ventilate the areas. This is the curing area that has a lot of fumes that we'll talk about. Here's another picture of the curing area for a different type of tire. And this last picture is a fellow just taking tires out of the area. Now it's obviously an intricate process, and there are just tons of chemicals, toxins, all kinds of stuff used in the industry every day. There are a lot of things that haven't been publicized very much. It's been difficult for employees to find out what they are. It's been difficult for researchers to find out what the heck they are, which is a big part of the problem as well. This is a page again out of the Red Book that talks about carbon blacks. Carbon blacks are pigments put into the tire to help them become harder and other processes to go along better. They've been implicated as a toxin, and we'll cover that in just a second. And this is a page that I took out of this particular pamphlet right here. This is a pamphlet called Cancer Risks in the Rubber Industry, the Risks and What You Can Do About Them. It's put out by OSHA. It's a fairly concrete pamphlet for the workers at the industry, and there's a lot of things like this that are really simple and concrete, pictures and information that talks about risks, and I've taken several pictures out of that book. It's hard to read that. What it says is, some specific studies show that compared to the general population, rubber workers in processing operations for mixing, milling, and compounding show increases in the number of stomach cancer in what? And in leukemia cases, okay? There's processing on the upper left, there's the curing area on the upper right, and the milling process down on the side. And this is another picture taken out of the same catalog that talks about those risks of cancer and what they're associated with. It talks about stomach cancer, intestinal cancer, pancreatic lung, prostate, and on an additional page, bladder cancers, skin, brain, and lymphatic cancers.
Is risk ratio times the normal?
Yeah, that's what they're saying. Now, you have to take this not with a grain of salt, but these things are not proved and cut and dry figures as far as what I can figure out from my research. They're real generalized, and they can't necessarily back them all up. I mean, you can't look at the skin cancer and say there's definitely a 6.5 times cancer risk in rubber workers. At the tire assembly department, from what I can find, and I'm not sure where they got this from exactly. Now, the column on the right is the work areas of highest risks. As the chart on our side shows, there's lots of different departments, and different departments have different susceptibilities to different toxins. The compounding area, the mixing area, tire building and milling, different areas there. The first cancer to get any big be publicized much was bladder cancer. Back in the 1920s in Britain, there was a lot of research into the fact that their rubber workers were getting coming down and dying from bladder cancer. And that was the first time that anything came about because of it. They implicated a chemical called beta-naphthalamine. It was taken off the production line and hasn't been used since. But we nowadays use a chemical called phenyl-beta-naphthalene, which can be broken down in your body, metabolized into beta-naphthalene, which is also implicated. There are obviously a lot of ways that workers can get exposed to the different toxins. They can breathe them in the dusts from the different areas. They can breathe them in from the solvents that are in vapors in the milling area. There are mists. They can get things cutaneously just by handling the different products. You saw most of those men that were working there didn't have too much protection except for the aprons. They can ingest things orally, but the biggest one is probably breathing them in through their lungs. In 1976, there was a study done in the Akron Firestone plant of 13,000 workers that showed certain things. Now, every time I read anything about a research project, it was interesting because some would substantiate one claim and others would substantiate another, but they wouldn't necessarily correlate at all. This one in Akron showed an increase in stomach cancer in the processing departments, such as milling, such as calendaring, and compounding. They implicated a non-respirable airborne particulate that got breathed onto your trachea, and then they coughed it up and swallowed it, and it was implicated in stomach cancer. Carbon black was the main particulate that was looked at. It's, again, a chemical that's used to add strength to a tire. The carbon black attracts PAHs, or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which they themselves have been implicated in cancer. The fellow in the film talked about nitrosamines. They've also been implicated. There's different softeners for the chemicals. There's different extenders, things that make them last longer. Again, I talked about the antioxidants and accelerators. It's obviously a complicated issue. The researchers have a difficult time in pinning down what chemicals they're dealing with. If you think about the curing area with all the fumes coming off the thing there, or the Bainberry mixer with all the chemicals and vapors coming off, it's very difficult to figure out which chemicals that you're dealing with. Our university here has an occupational health study group that's based down in the NCMB Plaza that's done some work with Harvard University, sponsored by United Rubber Workers and sponsored by OSHA, I believe. I'm not sure if OSHA was involved in that. That has gone into plants around here and also back up into the plant in Akron, looked at the same problems. Their reports are somewhat ambiguous in that they say there are possible risks, but again, they can't pin anything down. Besides the risks of cancers here, there's the same sort of risk you would think of if you didn't know anything about the industry. There's little cases of dermatitis, not little, but there's cases of dermatitis, there's cases of respiratory problems like emphysema, solvent problems that hurt other parts of your body, and I'll talk about when I get to the Wilson thing. Again, they're fairly simple things. Now, there's some positive things that I noted in the industry as well. These publications by OSHA are helpful for the workers. The United Rubber Workers has a big industrial hygienist part of their company that publishes things. This is a Rights and Resources pamphlet, an introductory guide to the URW Safety and Health Committees. And it lists procedures that they need to go through in order to get safety committees going, which is what the Wilson plant was doing. They have an industrial hygienist who publishes these things, URW studies. This is one on nitrosamines in the rubber industry. They go into research about the products. They go into things that you can do at your plant to try to head off the problem. These are the types of publications that UNC Occupational Health Studies groups did. This was one on leukemia in the U.S. rubber industry. they're good to read, but they're not necessarily all that conclusive. This is a slide from that OSHA pamphlet that deals with the departments, the job titles that the workers have that goes with it, the problems in that area, and what they might be able to do about it. Again, I think it's a positive step because they're trying to deal with the problem, such as down in the compounding area on the bottom there, there's different workers, the rubber cutters that work there, the weighers, the pigment mixers. Problems are the vapor and dust, petroleum oil extenders, processing oils, organic vulcanizers. Again, a lot of problems. Their advice tends to be somewhat generalized. Local ventilation on the mixer, which makes a lot of sense. Proper bag and container disposal. They talk a lot about respirators, things like that. Tight seals on the Bainberry mixer. There are things that make a lot of sense and things that would help. And I think that's a positive step. Same thing on different parts of the process, the cement house, the mill calendar. This is taken out of that pamphlet, examples of how to use respirators. We've heard a good bit about how they're somewhat cumbersome to wear, and that probably is true. Fume heads over the curing places.
When did you understand they began to ventilate? They didn't ventilate in the early years.
They don't necessarily, as far as I know, they don't necessarily ventilate entirely now. But I'm sure they did in the early days. The one thing that I didn't get to do that I really wanted to do is go into a plant. The one down in Wilson's a huge plant, but it's probably very difficult to get into, and I wasn't able to do that. This is a lousy slide. This is the last one of the thing, and I just wanted to show you the last part that was fairly relevant to our careers. They recommend that you get x-rays. They recommend that you have an SMA-12. They recommend down on number 3 there on the middle left that you get a complete CBC. It's obviously a CBC. There, respirator test, pulmonary function test on the right, urinalysis, and a sputum cytology.
How often do they recommend this?
I'm not sure all this is done by the companies, okay? And I imagine these people would recommend that you get it done yearly, but that's just a guess. At the end of several of the OSHA publications, they talk about things that they recommend to do in general, in the general context. They encourage the workers that you have to work with your company first, and if you can't work with, they really recommend that you've got to go through your management. If you have trouble going through your management, they say to go ahead and work through your union and then work through OSHA if you have to. But they say that OSHA should be the last step. They say you have to know your chemicals, which this plant in Wilson is trying to do. You need to practice good preventive work habits and get medical checkups. You have to have exhaust systems and things like that, which all make good sense. Last thing I want to talk about is going down to Wilson. There's a plant down there, a Firestone plant that employs 1,100 processing workers and 200 maintenance workers. The only part of the plant that's unionized is the maintenance workers, the 200 people who fit up in the top corner over there, and you can see of the part of the plant, it's a very minor part of the plant. As far as toxins go, they are probably exposed to far less toxins than anyone else in the entire industry. And I'm sure they wish the rest of the place was unionized because it poses some problems. Back in March of '82, they started a safety program on the lines of what I've been talking about. They've read some of the reports on toxins in the industry. They had not had a safety committee before. Since then, they have had NCOSH down, which Bill can probably talk about a little bit. He's worked with NCOSH for several years, to try to get going. They've asked for the names of all the chemicals that they've worked with. They've asked for monitoring on different parts of the different workers. They've had some success, and they feel pretty good about where they are right now. There's workers that have had problems with carbon black. There was one worker that had a 300% excess exposure to carbon black at one of their plants. At that plant, and the researchers recommended that he wear a respirator, which he was at the time, and he's still spitting up carbon black. That's a problem. They've had their problems are not cancer-related problems yet. The plant's been there since '74. They complain about stuff like headaches, vapors. They complain about losing hair because solvents will get on their scalp, and workers were complaining about that. Now, keep in mind, I guess I want to say, it's not, that sounds fairly negative, and maybe it is, okay? But I think they're going about it the right way. They've obviously got a fair way to go. Their last decisions at the meeting that I attended several weeks ago was to perhaps ask NIOSH to come in and do a investigation, which is, from what I understand, it's hard to do. Maybe Bill can say more about that. They are concerned about their new union demands, which are coming out at the beginning of the month and the beginning of the year, and they're incorporating more safety standards into that. They have this publication called the Union Bulletin, which they've gone about publicizing the, as I said, the problems. Here's a different segment that comes out every month about cancer in the rubber industry and things they'd like to get on about. Okay, any questions? It's a lot of material in a short period of time. And I don't want to leave you with a negative aspect, really, or a negative feeling about it. There are problems in the industry. They're trying to deal with them. They have the same management problems as a lot of different companies, I suppose. They have the added problem of they belong to, it's called the Firestone Allied plant, and they belong to the Allied maintenance workers. So the people from Firestone have at first sidestepped working with them because they didn't technically work for their plant. But that has gotten worked out.
Is Firestone with them?
At first, again, everything that I'm saying comes from them. Okay?
Right.
At first, they went through the safety engineer at the plant, and the safety engineer thought that he was just supposed to work with Firestone people. So it took, from what I understand, a month or two to get that straightened out, where the Firestone safety engineer would work with the Allied people too. They have, I've got some materials from the engineer, and he does basically what they ask him to do as far as monitoring. They make recommendations, such as wearing a respirator, such as getting out of an area if it gets too bad at a particular time or whatever. It's a little bit tense, and that just reading their documents, you can tell that they're not on the same side, and that's been a little bit tense.
Out of what you said, if they recommend them getting out of an area if things get kind of bad, I'm sure they have machines, they run a production line, and suppose it gets real bad, but you can't leave your machine untended. What are you supposed to do in that case?
I don't know.
I'm not trying to call you.
It differs for the maintenance people as opposed to the workers too, because the maintenance people can
they can get away.
Can get away just for a period of time where the other employees can't. It's frustrating to the maintenance employees a little bit because they haven't been able to get the cooperation of the other.
What is their international union? Is this the machinists?
Yeah, it's the machinist union. It's the International Association of Machinists, the Union of Allied Maintenance and General Employees.
So it's the machinists union that they're part of. It's, as you know, in the textile, it's a sort of remarkable circumstance, but unique in many ways, that the These are usually more highly skilled and floating workers who are in the union, and they're a minority of a big production plant. The production workers are lower paid generally and are not in the union. You correct me if you have any other questions.
I don't know.
Huh?
I don't know really, as far as.
These usually are, what maintenance people are. They're like as if the loom fixers, cotton mill had pulled out. You see, they're the people called upon. They're everywhere, but they can't bring along the larger number of lower paid production workers into the union, is what it looks like. But they have a lot of prestige. I mean, that's why they're able, I think, to function as a minority and keep high morale. So they themselves they're less replaceable. The other workers are much more scared.
Well, they seem to have a fairly strong union. We met at a McDonald's, and one of the things that bothered me was they were chain smoking while we were there. And that just throws off so much that you're trying to research when they smoke, because it takes away so much from the respiratory problem.
Well, we could just use that as a base and then go from there. Assume that everybody smokes.
They must all.
The Surgeon General has determined that this product is dangerous to all prospective studies. We're going to roll here.
Don't say that, I'm going to believe you.
This is an acronym game. What these have in common is occupational safety and health. This is the OSHA Act of Administration that was started in 1970. It also was the enabling legislation for NIOSH, which does the investigation. Those people call it NIOSH to do their research when they didn't have standards. Wasn't that in the film? Something like that? NC OSHA is North Carolina OSHA. When OSHA was started in 1970, states were given the option of writing their own OSHAs. North Carolina is one of those states. And NCOSH is just a local group, the North Carolina group that Eric and I have been working with. Occupational. All this legislation is like intrinsically boring stuff, so I'll try to run right through it. Just some things passed around. This is from NCOSH. It describes their work. This is an example of an inquiry that some people that worked at a waste treatment plant in Cherry Point wrote asking NCOSH to decipher some studies that have been done. This is a handout telling you how to research toxicological information, what hazards it has. This is an example of a brown lung screening questionnaire, a specific occupational health questionnaire. This is a general occupational health history questionnaire from San Francisco. This paper is just largely on OSHA and how it works, because I don't really know a lot about it. I don't think a lot of people do, so I'll assume that you're all ignorant. It started under the Johnson administration. 1968, Johnson's manpower message to Congress. I was 11 years old then, so I don't remember all that. The legislation went through and was signed by President Nixon in 1970. And it's great legislation, if they enforce it, it's great things, because its purpose is to assure, so far as possible, every working man and woman in the nation safe and healthful working conditions. And this, I'll talk about this later, is the general duty clause. The OSHA legislation didn't enact any standards, but it enacted legislation to develop standards, and the general duty clause to ensure a safe and healthful workplace where every individual can be used in an OSHA citation, which means that if you get an OSHA inspector coming into a workplace and they're exposed to Agent X, and there's no standard for Agent X, and there's no way of measuring Agent X, and people won't know what the effects of Agent X really are, but if they can show that people are getting sick, then they can tell they can tell management to clean it up without having to go through specific standards and what have you. That's a very powerful tool if you have an OSHA inspection. Federal guidelines before OSHA, before 1970, as Mike has said, it largely follows mining safety accidents. The Federal Bureau of Mines was established after the Monongah mine disaster. Is that right? Okay, I have Monongah down here. I'll just cross that out. In 1914, an Office of Industrial Hygiene and Sanitation was established. In 1936, which is really most of what they had before 1970, the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act set standards for safety, and I think that's largely like accident safety as opposed to exposure safety, for anybody that had a government contract exceeding $10,000. And A, this wasn't a lot of work in the nation, and B, it was unenforced, these standards. So the OSHA Act of 1970 followed the 1969 Coal Mine Health and Safety Act, okay? Before that, there have been some standards that were enacted in response to strong unions being able to, in specific industries, getting standards from management. Estimates of U.S. workplace mortality go as high as over 100,000 per year. And this slideshow that I have doesn't, it's not the part that I'm going to show you, but that's the equivalent of a full Boeing 747 crashing every day. It's the way they expressed it, just and killing everybody on board. That's a good way. That's a very great way of expressing it. As Molly Joel Coy said in class, up to 31% estimated of worker complaints, not worker complaints, but individual complaints of health problems can be related to the workplace. 80-90% of all cancers are believed to be of environmental origin and therefore theoretically preventable, and how much of that is due to workplace exposure is largely debatable. The OSHA legislation is not something that is being forced on workers. A survey of American workers found that while management and white-collar workers placed improved safety and health conditions near the bottom of the list, that's management and white-collar workers. Blue-collar unionists ranked health and safety as their first concern, ranking it above shorter hours and increased wages. Americans favor it, polls show, even if it means higher taxes, health and safety on the job. As I said, the OSHA Act sets no standards for toxic substances and hazardous work. It sets guidelines by which standards are to be adopted. It gives workers specific rights, which are very important when you're trying to deal with a complacent management and trying to get things changed. One thing is that you can file an OSHA complaint anonymously. I think you have to sign the complaint, but OSHA by law can't release your name to your employer. At NCOSH, we can't really tell people that that's true all the time because it's not certain that management won't find out somehow. That's illegal. They have specific workers have specific rights under OSHA, and that's the right to observe inspections, the right to have access to the results of the inspections, the right to appeal if management, the right to appeal the results of a claim outcome. And there's just a long list of review decisions. So if you have a strong union and lots of lawyers, you can just take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's a powerful tool if you use it. If the workers are unionized and OSHA is responsive, you can get a lot done with it. There is one person who just used the threat. I'll just give you a quote here of calling OSHA. I can just talk about getting an inspector in here, and the company's safety man will about to go to shaking trying to get things straightened out. OSHA doesn't really work in a lot of cases, and the reasons for this are several. First of all, it lacks the manpower to do the job. The Bureau of Mines has 700 inspectors to investigate 23,000 mine sites, which is not a great ratio to begin with. OSHA, this is 1965 figures, has 600 inspectors for 5 million workplaces.
What year did you say?
75, excuse me. It would take a couple hundred years to investigate every workplace at that rate. they do try to make priority inspections for hazardous industries or for places where people have called in a lot. Of the 10,000 people who graduate from medical school each year, only 6 go directly into occupational medicine, leaving 75% of occupational residencies unfulfilled. If you're worried about getting a residency, occupational health is for you.
How's it pay?
What's it pay? I don't know. Yeah, probably not as good as surgery. Another problem with OSHA is that there's a lack of standards. There are 12,000 materials of known toxicity in commercial use. So setting standards for all of them is impossible. In its first 5 years, OSHA adopted only 3 sets of standards for asbestos, for a list of 14 carcinogens, and for vinyl chloride, which I think causes bladder cancer.
Never.
Liver cancer, okay. NIOSH, which is responsible for setting up standards, has a list of 1,000 to 2,000 toxic substances that OSHA has taken no action on. No action has been taken on a priority list of 113 toxic substances. Politics delays a lot of standards. The benzene standard, the cotton dust standard, gets held up in court. We'll talk about that one. The last part of this is OSHA under the Reagan administration. There's lots of juicy stuff going on. Your handout tells you about the OSHA runaround and the kind of response that you can get when you make a simple complaint about a workplace hazard to OSHA. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and the appeals process works on the management side as well as worker side. So any complaint could take years to reach a final resolution. I won't go into that anymore. State OSHA, NC OSHA. Before National OSHA came along, before 1970 that is, states were responsible for whatever occupational safety and health legislation was on the books. And there wasn't a lot on the books. And this sort of poor state record has more or less come over into states that have chosen to run their own occupational safety and health programs. Now, these programs are, the legislation says that they must be as effective as federal OSHA. And when you have a state program, you're supposed to have federal overseers, which make sure that the state OSHAs are up to snuff. There are very few federal overseers to do this, and there are even fewer under the Reagan administration. The Teamsters Union accuses North Carolina OSHA of neglecting the law. The North Carolina Brown Lung Association cites the OSHA leadership for a lack of commitment. There are unfulfilled safety inspecting positions in North Carolina. John Brooks closed his files to federal, John Brooks is the Director of Labor, Department of Labor in North Carolina. He's going to be speaking at an NCOSH convention on the 6th in Raleigh. If you want to go. Closed his files to federal inspectors after a federal report was released criticizing North Carolina OSHA. John Brooks was wildly elated when Ronald Reagan was elected because he said there would be less federal interference in North Carolina. The federal report indicated that North Carolina OSHA takes too long to respond to complaints, doesn't answer some complaints at all, labels some serious violations as not serious, and doesn't inform workers, safety and health representatives of their rights in participating in the decision-making process when a complaint is filed. The last part of this is the slide presentation, and it concerns OSHA under the Reagan administration. Now, Ronald Reagan's only been in office about 2 years now, but they're real busy there in Washington, and I think a lot of this is in the slides, so I'll try not to go over it. They've cut the number of inspectors from its dismally low level to even more dismally low.
There you go again.
They've cut the number of citations. They've cut the number of serious citations, and they've cut the number of actual inspections. And this is from Carter administration, so this is not just OSHA bumbling along. This is playing politics with federal safety legislation. And politics plays a big part of this. There's in the book I have a copy of a letter during President Nixon's re-election campaign in 1972, promising that OSHA would be managed properly in order to get more business support, campaign contributions, that the cotton dust standard would be held up and they wouldn't be making any more infringements on businesses' right to make as much money as possible during the election. That covers a lot of it. So we'll see these slides, and then we'll have questions, I hope. And you have your tape recorder out?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
How long is this slideshow?
This is just a portion of the slideshow that's 20 minutes long. It shouldn't be more than 5 minutes. I think. Can you still do that and I'll put it back down?
How does OSHA fit in with the EPA, if at all?
Good question. I just met somebody that works for NIOSH, and she claims that NIOSH is under the CDC in Atlanta, and OSHA is under the Federal Bureau of Labor, I think. So what was your question? How do
they fit in, if at all? I mean, do they share information? Because the EPA does a tremendous amount of testing on what have you. Do they share information?
I don't know. The EPA preceded it. It's before 1970, isn't it? I really don't know. In fact, I think that they set different standards sometimes. There's a conflict there.
They fit together because they're both been cut down.
Right. I mean, Alan Gore stuff. Just as an aside, the new director of OSHA under Reagan is Thorin Ocker. They'll talk about him. And he's like giving business lots of concessions now and what have you. And Carter's old head of OSHA, Beulah or something like that, is now running a political action committee trying to raise funds to give to politicians who are running for office to support occupational safety and health control. So there's this huge dichotomy and idealism in the two administrations. Let's start this on slide number 31.
Who put this slideshow together?
Okay, this is the United Auto Workers slide, and I think they're part of the ASL, right?
There, right there.
Yeah, that's good. So, do you have the clicker?
Yeah.
All right. The button. OSHA under rate. Where's the volume on this?
On the left side. I think.
All right.
More effective, industries complained more loudly. They didn't want to follow the safety standards or to worry about government inspections. Industry rose up against what it called over-regulation. It wanted to get government off the backs of industry. Well, in 1980, industry won and elected Ronald Reagan president. Ronald Reagan said that the best thing government could do was nothing. To head OSHA, Reagan appointed Thorin Ocker, a vice president of a small construction firm and a strong Reagan supporter. Unlike previous OSHA heads, even under Nixon and Ford, Ocker had no professional qualifications or training. His main contact with OSHA was the fact that OSHA had cited his own firm 48 times. Since his election, Reagan has done exactly what he promised industry he would do. He's begun dismantling OSHA and agencies like it. OSHA is being gutted while administrators talk about protecting workers. One of OSHA's first actions under Ronald muzzle scientists who refuse to buckle under to the new administration-oriented line. Despite the Supreme Court decision to the contrary, the Reagan-OSHA insists on trying to balance the costs of passing new standards against the calculated dollar value of workers' lives. Standards will be scrapped if they're not worth the money. In jeopardy right now are the lead and cotton dust standards. After extreme pressure from the lead and textile industries, the Reagan-OSHA is trying to gut these regulations. Every previous OSHA administrator has insisted on engineering controls to solve job hazards once and for all. But the Reagan-OSHA is changing that. It says that instead of improving plant ventilation to control toxic dusts, simply passing out masks is okay, even though masks are not effective and they're hard to wear. The Reagan-OSHA says that instead of making machines and equipment quiet, it's okay just to give workers earplugs and let the workplaces stay noisy. There have been other changes too. A petition drafted by the UAW and signed by 11 other unions asking OSHA for a safer standard for cancer-causing formaldehyde was flatly refused. Evaluation forms have been passed out to employers asking how they liked their OSHA inspection, a move designed to demoralize the inspectors. Since Reagan took office, the number of government health and safety inspectors has been cut from 1,683 to 1,200. Moreover, the number of violations cited by these inspectors has dropped suspiciously. This graph shows the rising number of violations cited during the Carter administration, and then the drop in violations cited under Reagan. Even the most calloused observer would admit that workplaces have not suddenly gotten safer. OSHA inspectors are getting the message from Washington. Go easy on the companies. Changes in Reagan-OSHA policies have ended routine OSHA safety inspections for 90% of UAW plants, including high-risk operations like forges, foundries, and stamping plants. More changes in policies and procedures are scheduled. They will ultimately reduce the rights of workers to get an OSHA inspector into a plant. All this in the name of getting government off the back of industry.
It goes on to talk about their own union and blah, blah, blah. That's it.
Got about a half hour for discussion.
One of the things I think you left out of your consideration was the fact that for an OSHA inspector to come into a plant, the company knows full well that he's coming. Before he's there, they know in advance. And, someone from management will accompany him around, and they can pull these people around and let them, and have them see only what they want them to see to a certain extent.
Does management supposed to know when OSHA comes around?
They know. No one can enter your plant if you have a fence around it without your consent.
I mean, but would they know like a week ahead of time that some guy's going to go on Houston? But is that legal? Is that the way it's supposed to be?
It's illegal. I mean, would you consider it legal for someone to just come walking in your house or your place of business?
Well, the law is that no business can keep an OSHA inspector out.
Right.
But I didn't know whether there was supposed to be surprise inspections or not.
Well, I think what has been cited is the practical way it works. I mean, there's several hundred yards from the time he pulls outside a guardhouse to approach a guardhouse till, they call in, there's a stranger there. I mean, there's no, the way it's done differently under the Coal Mine Health and Safety Act is the right of the administrator of that act to declare certain mines so hazardous that they have enough inspectors. I don't mean that they have enough, but they have more than OSHA has, proportion of the workforce, So that, let's say, in the 40 or 60 most gaseous, where methane gas is on constant release, so that the danger of explosion is extremely great, and they have to watch for electrical hazards, they have to watch for spark, they station them there permanently. I mean, now that's the only way I can imagine that the point that's been made. In other words, that man is, there isn't a way in the world. He walks right in with a shift and changes economy. He shifts. And that is an excellent way to do it. And to my mind, but the OSHA law is a weaker law. You got to understand, like coal miners is one industry in relation to coal operators, where the Congress is liable, like Republican congressmen in Pennsylvania are likely to go along with the miners rather than ideologically against that small a group of employers. Here you're dealing with the rest of industry. Just think of it a minute, how little business, in this state can put pressure on the state, inspection apparatus. I mean,
And the second thing is, what can OSHA do about it? I mean, if they come in and find one violation or 1,000 violations, what power do they have to do anything?
citations, they can issue
That's all it
citations.
is. And then I think the company has the right to appeal it, and then they can appeal that citation, and then they can,
It's a slap on the wrist in their turn. What's a $250 fine? For having released fumes, extremely compared to spending $50,000 on getting a ventilating system for that particular area. They can keep taking those as often as they want to throw them out.
I've seen some citations, and management was just laughing at it. This is back in 1975.
Yeah.
Management said, don't worry about that.
Yeah. There must be something that happens beyond that. I mean, it's all a joke if that.
You mean, is it annoying to my, yeah, it is very
No, I mean, there
annoying.
must be something more serious that can happen.
They can proceed, for gross violations to fine, and I don't know unless you know the procedure, whether they can go into federal district court, whether they can enjoin them, from actually operating. I don't think it's as strict as, it ought to be. But
I'm not sure whether that would be a good thing either. You don't want to enforce the law by shutting down plants,
that's right.
Unless there's a gross safety violation there.
Well, I just wonder how much of the cutbacks in the thing are because it's an ineffective organization. I mean, if it's not doing anything.
But it's doing less now.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is a citation, I think, always gives the company a certain amount of time in which to correct the situation, and then there's a
If they
release
want to.
phase.
Then the period is several weeks or a month or a year before the OSHA inspector comes back, and then he can give you another citation. I've seen an instance where there were 6 citations over a period of 5 years. The same thing, it wasn't corrected, and finally, after about 6 years, they decided to correct it. Nothing was done about it.
You all understand that's the second one are just like all the National Institutes of Health that you've heard of, the NIHs, or the National Cancer Institute. In other words, they simply structured after occupational health came to the forefront. In other words, it began with the National Heart Institute, and cancer moved forward as National Cancer. It's the investigative, you really mean the research goes on in the National Institutes, you see. That's all that is. That's one of the National Institutes.
Yeah, investigative doesn't mean workplace.
Yeah, you don't want to, it's not the best word to use, it's rather the research arm, the way there's research on cancer and on heart. And it's one of the many NIH, you may have heard that phrase, or you will hear it in regard to other phrases. Then that's the national arm. And you probably ought to be pretty alarmed when a state like North Carolina opts to enforce its own law. I mean, knowing you almost wonder if the Chamber of Commerce here didn't say, hey, quick, run in there and use the option, right? It doesn't mean they intend to enforce it strictly. I mean, they'll get by with probably a weaker enforcement by using the option. So you get a take all the multipliers against the North Carolina workers, how many can you think of that came out of this presentation? I mean, you got, who's doing the inspection? The national inspector? So it's a state inspector, okay, versus it. Now you got a right to accompany the inspector, and how many places in this state has anybody accompanying the inspector?
Maybe where there's a strong union.
Well, now think about that a minute. On what places North Carolina in unionization of the factories? You see,
Probably 40th.
it's 50th. So that, it's the lowest proportion of unionism of the whole 50 states in the union. You know, I was at a faculty meeting the other day where several faculty members wanted to know where North Carolina got its liberal, reputation. They'd come from, one had come from Alabama, one from Texas, and you have to remind them it all came about 30 or 40 years ago, and there's no objective reason for North Carolina to be rated a liberal state. I mean, it doesn't elect black congressmen, doesn't elect, doesn't do anything in Atlanta or Birmingham, or it doesn't have unions in any proportion. You follow me? Now this gets serious down here. Your rights are related. Your right to accompany the inspector are simply zero. Those right is zero. Now you want to see the report. Does anybody ever see the report except management? Does anybody see the citation? You follow me? There's no one to step forward, you see. Even a weak local won't do much about this. You got to remember, part of the problem of union organizers is that they have such weak locals that some of them don't even ask for the right. They say the management calls the chairman of the committee and says there's going to be an OSHA inspector here tomorrow. Fine. He doesn't even know that he has a right to, take off and be paid tomorrow. You see what I mean? Or if he is, he's a dummy. And you see what I mean? It doesn't mean that because now you get the watering down process, you see. No one ever sees the report, so forth.
The workers that I visited down in Wilson, they're on kind of a, they're just feeling their way. They don't have very much power. And they had a problem a month or so ago about a worker with the maintenance department that had a complaint. They sent a complaint to OSHA. And about 2 weeks later, the worker told the head of the union safety committee that this guy came by one day with a management person and talked to him about the complaint, and the union person was really upset that the OSHA person in management didn't have him accompany them when they went on the request. So they're just feeling their oats as far as I know.
In West Virginia, one time we had a problem in the laundry at our hospital, and I wrote a letter to OSHA. And a week later, a man was at the door. He walked in and asked, Mr. Ayers, our administrator. He asked for Mr. Ayers, and he asked for labor representation. So there was 3 officials from the hospital, and 3 of us toured with him. Mr. Ayers wanted to know who had written the letter. My name was blanked out where he couldn't see it. He said, we're not at liberty to tell you this. And they did cite them and gave them 3 months. 3 months it was not taken care of, so we wrote another letter. They were back. 3 months later it was taken care of.
Was it perchlorethylene or something?
No, it was the heat in the laundry. No fans, no ventilation whatsoever. In a modern hospital.
Your hospital was probably the most modern, like a $10 million hospital, and gives you an idea of priorities too, not putting a fan into a laundry in a newly built $10 million small town. It's part, when you think of a non-profit community board hospital doing that, now imagine what a nice small bunch of entrepreneurs, really competitive, how they operate a 40-person shop, what they invest in. Any of you have any experiences in the towns you come from or anything where they think, or of the complaints the other way that reach that cause the administration to feel like they do, that the regulations are too stringent, or in unnecessary ways to be restrictive of industry. From your readings.
Don't you think this might fit into someone's major economic plans? And they say they don't want to do anything to hurt the free market system.
Yeah.
So they remove all the controls that they can. And if they know nothing about, exactly what direction to take, and one of the things that they hear more often than anything else is you got to get these people off our backs, and then we'll be able to, from some lobbyist organizations, management lobbyists come in and say, you got to help us out. That'll really help us out and give us a boon to the business. I would think that would be the biggest thing, biggest aspect.
I think there's no real lobby for this. You all have to understand how dangerous it is, because you don't realize how much physicians get into the middle on these issues. You see, you're out in the community. Here's Joe Berry was here. These issues actually come down in which, if you look at like British history, it was physicians that were the whole central figures in all the scientific advance for cleaning up the factories, for cleaning up. It's remarkable how much lawyers did not participate, professors did not participate, just physicians out in practice. We don't know out of what, purely probably their motivation as scientists, you follow me, of seeing the mines blow up, seeing the children in the factories. They actually became the people testifying, the people leading the whole thing without being part of politics. So they just ignored, follow me, the fact that the unions were there. They would end up maybe siding with them or going beyond them, but they independently were a force. And I simply suggest the following to you to think about, that the unions come late on the scene on this whole issue. The mine workers are the best example. Union almost 100 years old. It's first of all trying to survive as a union. People are being fired, they're being murdered, they're being evicted. You follow me? The first 50, 60 years, you see, they're molded to fight, first to survive, to get collective bargaining, second to get wages, right, to get decent pay for dangerous, and second, to get decent working conditions. You got to remember that means, do they weigh the coal right or rob them on it? It's 100 things that precede safety. That's why as physicians, I thought Eric's remark was not, you would all have felt the same way. He's annoyed that they're smoking at McDonald's because you're not going to have good research parameters. You got to see the reality. I'm not in any way, I think all of you would feel the same way. You follow me? That you see me, you're wanting good research parameters. They're probably in dangerous fumes, they're in dangerous dust. My God, they're smoking on top of it. How will we know when they get cancer, right? But this is the real world out there. To them, there's a million things that precede safety, okay? And I've tried to emphasize to you that even with all you're seeing here, what's the worst disease right now? I mean, there's no way in the world, and you hit at it. Can you imagine if the Coulomb workers one morning all get up, and you'll hear about that from one of the people next week, and they have no jobs anymore. That's it. They don't get 6 months notice. They don't get 6 years notice. They don't get options to buy stock. They don't get 10 years severance pay. You follow me? It's done. This is the fear they live in. So that you not only got 10+% of the whole American workforce out of work, you got another 10 or 20% feeling absolutely, in dread terror of this any morning. I mean, you don't, certainly that percentage, I'm sure of, you follow me, that are related. They're in plants where there have been layoffs. They're working at a 36-hour week. They've lost 4 hours. There's some threat hanging over them all the time, see? And if you think, don't be, when I put them down in my talk, I'm just as wrong. You follow me? I'm critical of myself as the other thing, that the guy, not a company in the OSHA inspect, he doesn't want to do anything else. Maybe the plant's going to shut down, Don't do anything to rock the boat, the local unions here, but, you know, get it over with. So you got to see how much it hits the community without any, what congressman, who was it? One of you spoke, was it you, Eric? Somebody said they're raising money, or one of you mentioned they're raising money to elect, to get congressmen.
Under Carter.
Yeah, to me, that's so hopeless. I mean, you know, you might get them to, you know, the Democrats, let's say, as we watch TV, might at the last minute put on a few spots to fight back that we, you know, the other side's going to destroy Social Security. So can you imagine any Democrat putting on a spot? You know, I mean, he's going to save occupational health and safety anywhere in the U.S. You see what I mean? It just is not. Just understand that. It's not a viable political issue. Not except for people at Chapel Hill. You know what I mean? Really, it's a Duke issue. It's a university issue. It doesn't, you can't even get a campus. You couldn't get 10 campuses to get, you know, representatives that are interested. You understand, a section of the intellectuals understand this. But this is how history, this is how times change. You know, this is a real thing that you're looking at, and I simply suggest to you that
I blame organized labor more than anybody else for that.
being asleep at the switch, I mean, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the point is the whole political outlook of this country doesn't support unions.
There's a what?
Doesn't support unions. I mean, unions are communists. And it's just really, coming from outside, there is no liberal side to the politics in this country. I mean, you have the Republicans, which are way out conservative. You have your Democrats, which to me are totally middle of the road and are probably a little right of middle of the road. And if you go any further over the middle, you've had it. I mean, it's just not acceptable.
Let me just say, Margaret's just said something. How many of you understand what she said politically in the spectrum? I mean, for instance, how many of you think the Democrats are anywhere left of center?
I don't say Democrats, some Democrats.
All right, some. All right, say, how many of you think the majority of the Democratic spokesmen are in any way left of center?
Left of center
I
of
don't
this.
say majority.
Huh?
I don't say majority.
Does anybody think a majority? I mean, you understand the politics here is sort of on the ridiculous side in world politics. You follow me? There is no balance to, you know, what's hitting. When you all say, we don't have to be political to say that, whether you're in Spain, if you were the Pope arriving in Spain, you know, he isn't flying into Spain for the fun of it right now. You know, he's arriving because of the first socialist government is taking over. You follow me? I mean, world politics moves like that. You follow me? He's arriving to shake hands with a socialist government to make sure that the army generals don't overthrow the government and go back to fascism. You follow me? He's more afraid there'll be another civil war and the Catholics will end up attending church less and end up, it's just very good politics for the majority religion there, you know, to be well led. In our politics, we don't even think like that, you know.
George Wilder, the sort of outspoken liberal qualifications, political qualifications there, he's a Nobel laureate, that's why people listen to him. They say what this country needs is not a third party, what this country needs is a second party. There's no distinction between the Democrats and Republicans. You want to see valuable parties right now in the long run. There's not a twiddle's worth of difference between them.
This looks just like the other letter.
But maybe they're...
Well, you know, but there is a law on the books. The sad thing is there's a law on the books. Is it being enforced? That is the law of the land, that there will be safe workplaces. There will be inspectors to make them safe.
It's way too general. That's one of the biggest things. I mean,
So that should be one of the strengths.
Well, when you set an agency up like that, you know, and you make it generalized, all you do right there is build in billions and billions of loopholes. You got to be specific about things. You got to say 200 parts per million of this and whatever of that. And they can do whatever. I mean, you can't, make a safe workplace without establishing what safe is.
But then you'd never, in the current climate, you'd never get anything on the books.
You won't get any more than you got. better enforce.
Well, you're probably
part
gonna
of
get
what
less
they
than
have.
what you got, because it'll never even get there.
Yeah.
I
We
mean,
don't
that's what
have the
happens.
82 statistics. You understand that you're giving early
More than anybody.
data. We don't know what the decline in inspections is. It'll decline straight towards zero. See, when you appoint a Secretary of Energy and openly state his task is to end the Energy Department.
It's already back now.
The legislation states, ever since the Arab oil embargo, we are to create alternate energy sources, right? We're to go get shale, we're to go get coal moving, we're to clean up coal, we're never again to rely on being shut down as a nation when we have resources. But we've ended this effectively. That's what administration can do with the three-party government. I mean, they can really end what the law and the books say. See, there is no energy moving, and this is what I fear will happen here if Congress doesn't speak up strong for its own law.
They'll have to come out of organized labor.
And organized labor, I agree with you, is rather gutless. I mean, Margaret's
Who else is
statements
gonna
about
lobby?
politics are true, I think.
Who else will lobby for it?
Well, you're right. But it'll take a revolution from below with the lazy kind of leadership, One reason, for instance, if you all even get a little bit of the newspaper headlines, that big dinners are being held for the incumbent president of the Mine Workers Union all over Washington, big contributions have been raised, is because there is a rank and file slate of coal miners out to dump the present incumbents. So what's happened is the present incumbent is raising an awful lot of money from other union leaders. I think the Food Workers Union, all 28 vice presidents, handed him $200 at a dinner. It's like he comes out of a dinner with $90,000 or $100,000 in just one little. It's not this kind of spots we're seeing, like on the Kobe, that kind of ridiculous, business that's filling the air right now. You can't watch anything, This DUI guy is a communist almost, down there with it. In American politics, it's like who's a family man, they don't seem to understand. You go to church to get morality, you go to politics to get your viewpoint over. You don't give a who does it or who he sleeps with you. The main thing is not whether Jack Kennedy did or didn't sleep with the mafia's girlfriend. The question is, did he inspire a nation? Did he read from Robert Frost? Or did things happen? That's exactly that it. I mean, if you want to be ridiculous, then take off that way. At least, it was a Peace Corps or something. You see what I mean? I think he accomplished very little, but he inspired kids ahead of you. A whole generation of young people were inspired, And truthfully, under Ford and Nixon, you had no decimation. Truthfully, you did not have. They appointed, in my opinion, people that I might not have agreed with, but I had to say, were experienced inspectors of Republican registration who knew to go into this thing and inspect. And they simply would say, lay off of worrying about whether the covered wheel is turning or not, and get onto the open belts. I mean, they gave them instructions to inspect it that were more conservative, but they were sensible. What you got now is a total appointment of a man who is angry because his plants have been inspected and he's been cited. And every inspector knows he's going to be fired if he inspects a plant tough. That's really, you see, everything that's been said by Ed and all, about what goes on in the plant is the God's truth. I mean, imagine a poor inspector who has to live in Pilot Mountain and head for Winston-Salem, huh? Wouldn't that be a wonderful territory to cover? I mean, you end up, who runs Winston-Salem? I mean, who could write a letter to, you imagine a letter from R.J. Reynolds to the income, whatever it is, the inspection agency, that is the law speaking of it.
How many states end up having their own state-run ocean as compared to the government? Most?
Yeah, well, they almost have 21, I think.
Do you know if some of them are stronger, or do some of them do it because they believe more than
in
the
California, the crazy people out in California have strict standards on some things. And one of the things that the Reagan administration has proposed is that they cut funding to states that have stricter standards than federal standards.
Oh, my
keep these people in line. You don't want them having safer workplaces than necessary.
Where does this fit in with the whole self-help movement? Like, you know, you're supposed to be encouraging your patients not to smoke, right? Not to do, I mean, you know, now they go to workplaces that are dangerous. I mean, how does a physician avoid, you know, I don't really see very much how groups like yourselves are not going to end up as caring physicians having to do something, whether you're non-political or not, you know, to have viewpoints on these kind of things. If the workplaces are unsafe, then what in the devil are you doing? You know, handing people nerve pills and giving them this and giving them that when the fumes are taken in again.
Why don't you making $100,000 a year? That's what you do. You shut down a couple plants in your community. What are you going to do? How are you going to make a living?
Yeah.
But does it have to reach that point?
Well, I'm not arguing. I'm just
You're
making.
making-
I'm just bringing it
The
up.
fear, the definite fear and the balance, and you've cited the balance in your presentation. That, you know, you could be in trouble if. That's the other side, really, of the whole Reagan argument, is that it's interfering with, you know, industry being able to move forward, compete with the Japanese, compete with the Germans, and yet, you know,
What was the German policy that they had that came under the chancellor that just went out that, he was much more of a liberal, and supposedly got their economy in trouble for all the concessions they made to the workers. And I know that talking with someone from Germany, he said that you could declare a mental holiday, or that you needed mental rest, and you could go to these government-run health spas for like 2 weeks. You just take off from work for 2 weeks and relax, and they had this therapy for you to get you back into shape and go back into the plant. I think they've just stopped all of those programs.
You know, something that occurred to me from talking with Joe Berry last week. We're all sitting around. We're supposed to be a board, you know, of citizens selected somehow from the population who were determining by the adversarial process. You know, 2 lawyers talking 50% of both sides, trying to make the best case for whether this guy gets compensation, how much. And a lot of our attitudes, and this didn't occur to me until it was all over, a lot of our attitudes towards that, I mean, nobody thought that was really too much of a weird thing. You know, we sort of participated in it, and because we knew that's really was how it worked. But, you know, a lot of our attitudes is because we're Americans. And in Europe, you know, I think they would have found that to be a very strange thing because...
Japan especially.
Yeah, because workers' compensation is something that is just a right, and I think the United States is like one of the very few countries in the world that doesn't have guaranteed, you know, worker health insurance, which takes care of a lot of the compensation. This sort of thing about, you know, a worker has to fight for some sort of right, you know, what right does this guy have to the money, you know, just because he got sick on the job, and he's trying to sponge off society. That's a very American attitude.
See, in Europe, there are enough kinds of social legislation that really no employer would waste his time in an adversarial thing because he doesn't pull it onto this, he'll pull it onto that, or go on a plane. I mean, except they have a different, and in Japan, they simply have what? Do they have 1/10 of the laws we have or less? So they simply don't have adversarial stuff like we do over every issue going. I think they don't use lawyers at all in divorce. They don't use lawyers at all in industry. I mean, there are entire areas in which lawyers are simply not used, and they're very costly element of our whole, we call it democracy, but it isn't necessarily the wisest way to settle things, you know. Now that we've dealt with world problems, anybody got any words of wisdom or viewpoint they want to present? Anyone have any,
I just want to say, I think after being involved with the project that I was, that I realized how little I did know about occupational health, and there's a heck of a lot more that we need to know, and if it's really important, just happy. I mean, heck, people spend 2/3 of their waking hours in their job.
Well, thank you again, and you know where you're coming next time. I hope we don't have one single person say they waited in this room for class to convene. You all got to speak where you're coming.
Will there be a way I can show slides out at your house? Is there a wall I can show?
Yeah.
Slides.
I gotta remember to try to get an extension cord or something if you needed it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can bring an extension cord, I just don't have access.
I'll just have you hang a sheet or something over pictures if that's all right.
What time does it start?
2 o'clock. Well, 2 to 6 is the class, and then you all, you can decide what you want to do together. There'll be means of staying on for as long as you like to enjoy yourself.
I took a run, relating the problem, it was, who pays it all, any evolution, there's a chemical engineering course.
Dawn's got it all. Give it up. Give it up, Sean.
That really made it so